sportfisherman.com. I'm back. It's Kevin Knox again. Today we're going to talk about spining a rod. Now, as you know, we left off with cutting the blank, cutting a little bit off of the tip, cutting some off of the butt, and installing the foregrips. So now what we need to do is we need to prepare the rod for being used on the lathe to start putting under wraps, butt wraps, the guides, the over wraps, and then the finish. But what we need to do is start figuring out the spine of the blank. What is the spine of a blank? The spine is a harder portion of the blank that develops during manufacturing. During manufacturing, what they do is with these blanks, you can see here that the tip of that blank is hollow. And what they do is they actually have a mandrel that they start wrapping the e-glass or the graphite around that mandrel. Well, with every the production that they have, you're going to have a starting point and an ending point for the material that's being made into your blank. So by having these starting spots and ending spots, what you effectively do is you add one more layer, one more revolution around that blank than in other areas. So the blank is naturally going to want to move and bend in one direction. I mean, if you think about it, with a fishing rod blank, this blank has one job only, and that job is to go from being bent to going straight. That's all it wants to do in life. So when it bends, it's going to want to bend in a natural way. So what we do is we actually have a process that we go through called spining the blank, and we can go through and do some bending on this blank to find out the characteristics of the blank and how it actually wants to bend. So what I do, I used to have a spine finder and I still have it, and it's put away, but I've done so many rods that I sit here and I know what I'm doing with them, and I can play with them and get the feel for where the spine is. So what I do is, first of all, I grab a China marker pen. That's going to be used to mark my spine. But what I do is I actually bend that blank on the floor and start playing with it while it's bent and moving it around and getting it to jump around and find that natural spine of where it wants to bend. And I can duplicate that. Duplicate it by meaning that I put the blank into a spot where a position, see how it's bent over here. I put it into a position where I know it doesn't want to be, and then I just take this finger and flip around and play with it until I can get that spot to repeat and duplicate. So I want the rod to bend straight up and down. So by having that blank bend in this direction right here, I've turned the blank in my hand while I was doing this. I have found the natural bend that this rod wants to make. Now we're doing stand-up tuna rods, so of course the guides are going to go on the top portion of this spot. If we were doing a spinning rod, what we would do is get that rod to bend, and then we would mark the underside, because that's the natural bend and that's the bend that we want to go on. The difference between a custom-built rod and a mass-produced rod is that most of the people in the industry that are building these rods in factories, what they used to do was spine the rod. They would get the natural bend, they would then take a pen and mark that bend, and then they would build on that bend. Well, what they started finding out years ago when they started going overseas to get a lot of the blanks made, some of the American manufacturers found that when they were getting the blanks in and they were starting to build on that spine, a lot of the rods were not straight. The blanks were actually made and they were crooked on the mandrel. So what they started doing was realizing that, hey, we've got all these wasted blanks that we can't use, so what we need to start doing is building on the straight. So what they would do is they would take that blank that had a dog leg to it and they would turn it over, or they'd turn it up. Most of the times they turned it over, so the rod would have a bend like this. That rod will still bend in most instances correctly, but there's a lot of times where the spine of the blank overwhelms the curve and it'll actually want to curve in your hand. When do we see a blank want to curve in your hand? It's always at the worst time. You have a fish on that is maxing that rod out, and it is actually going to cause that rod to turn and want to turn in your hand. So not only are you fighting a fish up and down, you're fighting your own rod going left to right or right to left. So today there are a lot of builders out there that will build on the straight. Again, I go back to my roots of where I learned and go by what I was taught 20 some years ago down at Hatteras and Kitty Hawk. I always build on the spine, even if it's a spiral wrap jigging rod. Some people say, well, you don't have to spine the rod anymore. To me, that's like buying a nice car and not balancing the tires or not doing a tire alignment. It just doesn't make any sense in my mind. It takes me literally 20-30 seconds to find the spine of the rod, and then I can mark it, which I would do like that, mark it and go with it, and then I build on that spine. So this is just a little insight into how we're getting prepared. We're getting closer to getting the actual thread work on the rod, and that's what I know everybody likes to see, but you got to get the mechanics down, and you have to get these not ground rules, but just the basic gist of what's going on. You have to get those down square before you can start doing all your thread work. So that's pretty much the spine. And if anybody has any questions, feel free to post them up. I can answer them right away for you. And it's a big debate. Some people, and it's actually a heated debate. A lot of people think that their way is right, and I say no way is right, no way is wrong. It's in the eye of the builder and what you want to do. I just take the extra step and do it, and that's my choice. So that's it for spining the blank. Again, just take that rod, bend it down, find the natural progression of the bend, and you can see that this blank dancing in my hand. And I keep turning it. You can see with my right hand I'm turning the rod while I'm pushing down with the left hand. And I get that blank to where it will always bend and come up in that one spot. You can see how it keeps coming back to this one spot. I think it's critical with the stand-up tuna rod or even an IGFA rod to be building on the spine. Get everything absolutely correct. You don't want a rod twisting, because if you have repeated twisting, you will have failure. You will have either blank failure or you will have guide foot failure. So build on the spine. That's my little 2 cents and my plug that I'm going to do for that. But once you get it like this, just mark your rod. Put a mark right there so that way you know it's on the spine. And when we get over to the bench and start doing some of these rods, you're going to see that mark on there, and I'll point it out continually throughout the process. So hope this helps, and look forward to the next installment. Talk to you soon.